You're tuned in to RX Radio.
On the story.
Yeah, so you don't have to declare your major until like the second semester of your sophomore year. And I went to see my advisor for business, and she was like, "Dude, what the fuck are you doing? Like, your grades in these classes you need are so bad. You haven't taken half the prereqs you need. You've taken all these like kinesiology classes for no reason." So I was just taking them for fun as electives because I liked it.
Yeah.
So like I left the office like demoralized, and then like I walked over to the registration office, and I was like, "Fuck this!" I wrote down kinesiology on my sheet, and I just turned it in. Like, didn't consult with my parents or any friends or anybody. I just like called my parents, and I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna do this now." They're like, "What?" They're like, "What the fuck are you gonna do with that?" So
Man.
that was like my introduction into, and like clearly like I like played sports my whole life, so I had like an interest in training and the human body and nutrition, etc. So I had a good background in that, but I was like, now I like have to figure out how I'm gonna use this.
Yeah. That's fucking wild, dude. That's so funny. But before we continue on that story, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to RX Radio. You have stumbled upon Nick Ridpath as he's telling a story of how he got into training and kind of his athletic and academic career, where that started. If you were involved with the collective, with the level one, you should know who Ridpath is. He does our athletic development lab in the collective. Wealth of knowledge and experience at his bright young age of 22. I always forget how old you are, but you're forever 22 to me.
27 last week.
All right, so same. Um, but Ridpath has been, man, you've been down for the ride since the beginning in terms of prescript. You've been, as long as I remember doing labs, I remember you being in them. So it's cool that you finally have your own lab. You were in the level 3 last year, in the level 3 this year, on the instructor side this time. So it's been really cool. Yeah, it's been really cool to see how like you've grown over your career, because I guess I've known you about 5 years now. Has it really been that long?
Yeah, dude, you basically know me for the extent of my career.
That's unreal.
Essentially, what happened was I was working like front desk at a gym my last semester of college, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a trainer here. So I got my NASM shit, whatever. I applied, and like the manager just ignored me. He's like, yeah, you're not gonna be a trainer here. So then I applied to a gym down the road, and I got the job right away. And then the day that I was gonna start, all the gyms shut down for COVID. So I was
Fuck,
like, yeah. I
dude.
was like, oh, okay. I was like, all right. So I moved home. I started like training kids out of my garage. I started doing like dabbling in some online stuff. And then like naturally gyms opened back up. I applied for a job at Anytime Fitness, and I lost out to a pool of talented applicants who I'm sure were all much more qualified than me.
Bunch of
So I kept
retards.
doing yeah, dude, it was so bad. The dumbest fucking excuse ever. And like I'm not even gonna get into the guys I know they hired, but those who know.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. So I kept just ripping out my my own clients through my garage gym, and then I started training like the high school football team because I had a plug in there, and then yeah, I got a job working over in a nearby town, like managing a small sports performance gym. We had like 80 some kids, all different sports, like age 9 through even like semi-pro guys, like semi-pro golf, semi-pro or Canadian football, like semi-pro baseball. Um, yeah, so it's like a good variety there, and it's also attached to a PT clinic. So originally I wanted to do like physical therapy, so I did a lot of hours at this guy's clinic when I was still in school. And then it turns out he bought like a sports performance gym while I was like graduating, and then yeah, so I got to work with all these athletes. I would do like one-to-ones with people who wanted like a continuation of care after their PT. So I got a lot of experience like working with injuries, both between like more like common pop clients that were coming off of their PT, but also with like a lot of athletes are dealing with common injuries too. So I got a really good perspective there, a good variety of clients. I also had obviously him as a resource to like bounce ideas off of how to like handle different things from an injury standpoint.
That's unreal, dude. That's such a valuable experience to have, especially right out of school, right into your training career, is that working not only with kind of the normal gen pop, but also working with an athletic population. And then the shit that I like to do is exactly what you were doing, is working in the rehab setting, getting them back to performing in the gym. So that's a pretty wild experience to have just out of college during COVID, training out of your garage. Um, And that's funny. I didn't realize that I've known you essentially your whole training career, because it's really cool to see what you've done in, 5 years is a relatively short amount of time, but you've been able to move really fast in that amount of time, pick up a lot of momentum. Because I've seen you go from, okay, that's the entry point, which that entry point puts you so far above so many people just in terms of experience, because you're getting exposed to so many different things in so many different settings. And I think there's this almost inherent kind of fear around injury for new trainers. So it sounds like you being in that sort of scenario and like working one on one with people post injury or post rehab, that kind of it allowed you to bridge that gap of, oh, like this person's not fragile, this person's not broken, they just need the proper rate of progression, they need the proper exercises. And that really forces you to kind of find your own thought process around progression really early on in training, which I think a lot of people, they just don't get exposed to that, probably out of fear, probably a little bit on the side of like fear mongering in the education space as well. So that's really cool to see. And I think a part of this story that everyone missed, because I'm not sure if we talked about this when I hit record, was that when you were in college, you were playing Division I football.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not only were you, heading in the direction of kinesiology, saying fuck business degree, um, and like thinking about training as a career, but at the same time, like you're coming off of a D1 football background. So what kind of experience did that help you bring into training as you started?
Yeah, I think it just gives you like a really good idea of, I don't want to say high level performance, but like, being around really good athletes, being around like that competitive atmosphere, at a Division I level, and then just getting insight to like what kind of like common ground is for that training structure.
Mhm.
Not to say that it was bad, but like it's definitely a learning experience. And that was like, we had a lot of guys that were beat up all the time, especially like shoulder labrums, like back things that are like generally pretty preventable. So that's kind of where I started to dig in myself. Like, okay, like how could I potentially do this better? Like, is there something going on here? I was always pretty like inquisitive in that regard. Like, I wanted to figure out how to do things the best way for performance, and just getting an exposure to like what a college weight room's like, what that atmosphere is like. Because it's not just like football too, right? There's other sports in the weight room. You get like a pretty good exposure to a lot of different sports, like training from a weight room
Mhm.
perspective. So yeah, getting that background I think was like super valuable leaning into my own career as a trainer.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's like there's a level of chaos there. It's funny because that's kind of how I got into training as well. Was that like, I got into strength and conditioning through wrestling. We had just a trash strength and conditioning program at my school with wrestling, but like no one fucking knew any better. So it's like everyone just runs in, like everyone maxes out their bench press. They do like I don't even know what the fuck we did at the time, like some power cleans and some deadlifts, and then we go run the halls for 30 minutes. So it's like you go from that atmosphere. And then for me, similar story is that I got a little bit more into it. I started training with like one of my friend's dads that took on a group of wrestlers, and he like kind of trained us. And like this kid was like one of the best wrestlers to ever come out of the program at my school. But I think, as we'll kind of get into a bit here, the some of the best athletes, it's in spite of what they do in the gym, not necessarily because. And this was absolutely one of those scenarios that like I just got wrecked. Like I fucked up my back, like a sprained SI joint in the gym, and like I was out for probably like 8 weeks because of it. Just like couldn't even hinge over, and like that was the thing that set me down that trajectory of actually learning. It's like, all right, there's got to be a better way to do this, a more effective way to do this than just like doing everything as heavy as possible all the time. So that's when I started to learn so that I could, help myself. Essentially, I wasn't even training people at that time. I was just trying to make myself better at it, and that was like a really uh, it was just a really impactful kind of learning experience for me to have the buy-in to learn the stuff and to apply it on myself before I even started doing it on other people.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of takeaways from it. Like even in spite of what you're doing, it still teaches you like structure and how to train hard, like, how to show up consistently,
Yeah.
right? And then like even from like an observational standpoint, it's always super interesting because kind of what we were just getting into is like some of the best athletes are the shittiest in the weight room. And
So
then some of the
true.
guys honestly, most of the guys that are the best in the weight room aren't very good on the field. Like I
Yeah.
was already pretty good. I was always like pretty good in the weight room, but I was always pretty ass on the field. Like I definitely didn't reach my ceiling of what I could have been.
Yeah.
But like,
That's me for
and then there
sure.
are, yeah, and then there are like some outliers, just dudes like Saquon Barkley that you're going to see that are like they're sick in the weight room and on the field. But
Yeah.
clearly like what we just saw down in Tampa for the last 2 years, like some of these dudes are sick athletes, not weight room guys, which is cool. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really cool thing to be able to see and interpret, especially now knowing what you know, knowing what I know, is that, oh, like, okay, you're having issues with X, Y, and Z, or like you can't post on your left foot or you can't cut to the right. And then you see how they move in the gym and you're like, oh, yeah, I know exactly why you can't do that shit. It's because your hip stability is ass. Like you don't understand how to use your core whatsoever. And then that's from this side of things. It's a really cool thing to be able to observe and interpret because it's like, all right, you're having issues in your game because of these things, but also there's a very strong correlation to the way that you're moving in the gym. That if we can clear this up in the gym, you'll see the correlation on the field of being able to be more agile, be able to cut, run, stop, move, pivot, like do the things you need to do to be good at your game. So having gone through this and like it's so funny you said like I was the same exact athlete. Like I enjoyed being in the gym way more than I enjoyed like wrestling or baseball when I was playing either of them. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I'll do this because this is what I've always done. But like lifting weights is way more fun than this shit. So it's I mean, I look at it like that's my arena. It's like I'm the professional here. You're the professional on the field. Like I can interpret what you need to do, and we can work on the things that are going to make you better on the field because this is my realm of expertise. Like I know what to do here.
Yeah, but that just builds a lot of trust with the athletes too. If you can translate, why we're doing X, Y, or Z in the weight room and say, hey, like this is how to make you better on the field. They're like, bet, cool. Like I get that. I can buy into
Yeah,
this.
bet. That's why I think you're 22 because I don't. It took me 2 weeks to figure out what bet meant.
I think I've just been spending too much time with these kids, dude.
um, All right, so like we'll kind of continue on with this because I think you have a really interesting career trajectory. You were in this facility, you were working with teams, you're working kind of Gen Pop and in the rehab setting, and then what kind of caused the move? Because you moved out of there, you moved into DMV where you're currently at, and then things started to kind of shift one way, and then now it looks like they're shifting back another way. So what was that like going through that move and that transition?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty cool for me, like just starting from scratch again. Moved up to DC. I was lucky to get connected with Leo at DMB Iron, like one of the sickest gyms,
Dude, it's
definitely in the
so
country,
sick
if
there.
not the world. Yeah, like
Yeah,
I never take it for granted. Um, but yeah, like just getting to start in there and having all this cool equipment and being in a market like DC, like how like big urban areas are, like it's pretty easy to start to build, personal training base. But it was a bit of a career change for me, like going more from exclusively training like athletes and people who are hurt to just like more common population clients, which
yeah,
like inevitably that kind of ends up coming like full circle the longer that I've been up here. But yeah, I think like there's still a lot to be taken out of that, even though I had like a bit of a career change. Like there's a lot of carryover from training like just gen pop to training athletes, right? Like kind of we were just talking about, like athletes are really good overcomers, like they're really good at sport, but a lot of the times they're not very good at just doing like very basic tasks in the weight room, like basic movement patterns, right? Like they're going to organize themselves in what a way that they think is efficient,
yeah.
which usually is not efficient based off of like the way that we describe function, that the shoulder, the hip, spine, whatever it is. So they're good at doing the tasks that we give them, but they're not very good at doing it in, I don't want to say the proper way, but in a way that might be more productive.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that is an interesting kind of direction to go with it because I guess if I look at myself and like the trajectory I took, like it's very similar as I worked with like wrestling teams, my high school wrestling team when I was in college. And then in college, like I was wrestling, like I took a little bit of time off. I got back to wrestling and it was more so in that training atmosphere. And then when I started personal training, it was like I took the that mindset and that rationale I had always known from like strength and conditioning for wrestling to Gen Pop. And I was just fucking people up. Like people would not come back to me because like it'd be just like some 22-year-old girl that hasn't ever done weight training before. I'm like, oh yeah, I got you. And I just take her through like the same workouts I do for like my wrestling team, and she'd just be wrecked, dude. She'd be a cripple afterwards and just never come back. So it's like there, for me, that transition from like athletics to Gen Pop, it was like it took a lot of restraint, because up to that point, all I had ever known in terms of training was my training, or like how I approach training for myself. And at that point, like we're talking, I was probably 19 or 20 when I started training other people. So, and I started like training in a gym probably at about 12 years old. So at that point, like we're talking, I don't know, about 8 years of experience in terms of my training age, of this is how you train. And even in that, people just yelling at me to go harder, like no coaching, no instruction, just like go harder, go heavier. And then me taking that and like trying to bridge that gap to Gen Pop, there's like, it was a pretty steep learning curve, because like I don't know, this was still in the age where you really had to seek out this information. Like now it's like you go on Instagram and 30 people are telling you the best exercise to grow your delts, and it's like, all right, whatever. But at this point it was like training was kind of like a fringe hobby to have. Almost, it's like you either did it if you were in sport or you did it if you were in bodybuilding, and there wasn't like as much in between as there is now. There's like 30 shades in between. So like going from that atmosphere and just like taking people that had never been in the gym, like, oh yeah, I got you, and then just destroying them, it's like that was like a stark realization for me, like, oh fuck, like I need to learn more, because I'm not going to make any money doing this if no one comes back because they're crippled now. So what was that transition like? Hopefully it wasn't as rough of a realization for you as it was for me, but like going from that more athletic and rehab setting to like, all right, I'm now a Gen Pop trainer. Like what did you realize at first? What were the things that needed to shift or change, or where did you have to adjust?
Yeah, I think for me, so like the thing was, even like when I graduated school and I was just doing like training out of my garage gym, I was already getting some exposure to some Gen Pop clients. Like I had like
Mm,
Gen Pop, like moms and dads that were coming into the garage to train with me. So maybe I'd train like two athletes in the morning, and then I'd train as like a Gen Pop, client.
yeah.
And like I think I graduated in May, and I started the apprenticeship level one in maybe August. And also from like a social media landscape, like I think it was the perfect timing, because like there was a lot of really good resources out there at the time, but it hadn't gotten so, I don't want to say saturated, but kind of what you're saying now is like everyone's an expert. It's hard to tell who to follow. It's like back,
Yeah.
in 2020, I think that was a lot more condensed. There's a lot more people that were kind of commonly established as like respectable. So
Right.
like I had like the perfect environment of like I have all these different people to train at once. I'm starting to learn some cool ideas like indexing exercises through the level one. Then I also had the community there of people to bounce ideas off of. I did like a mentorship with Killian earlier in my career, so like anything I was uncertain of, I just asked him.
Yeah.
And like with all of that as kind of a backstop, like I felt like indestructible. Okay, it's like if I can't figure it out, like I know where to go to figure it out. Like I have these resources to kind of lean on to figure out how to do these things. That's also like part of why I felt so confident, like saying yes to everything. Like
Yeah.
whether it was post rehab, athletes, Gen Pop, whatever. I was okay. Like I have all the resources at my disposal to figure this out. So like I'm gonna say yes now, and I'm gonna figure it out and try to build my skill set early. So then when I did get up to DC and DNB Iron, like it felt like a pretty seamless transition in that part. I think the hardest transition was more so like now like my business was entirely on me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the tough part of being a trainer, is that a lot of people are good at what they do in terms of training clients, but not so good at the organizational side, or the business, or like the kind of selling themselves side. I know that gets like a negative connotation, but like if you're good at what you do, you have to sell your service so that you can help people. And I think people like, especially that aren't as business minded, or are more like, all right, I'm going to focus on being a really good trainer, like they almost feel bad for taking people's money at first doing it. And it's like this weird in between of like, all right, you can't help people if you're broke and you don't sell your services. And then there's some other guy that's completely and utterly retarded, that's like getting all these clients just because he has this like crazy level of false confidence, and doesn't know how dumb he is. So I feel like being a trainer, that's like another one of those hurdles you have to overcome, especially going from a facility where you're more or less an employee to now like, all right, I'm in charge of growing my own training business. So that's a pretty big hurdle to jump in the near term too, because it's like, if this is something you're new at, now you have to build the confidence that you're worth X amount of money per hour to train these people. And there's a bit of a mental battle with that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think part of like your confidence is going to be in being competent, which is kind of what I was saying. Like, invest in educational resources, invest in mentors, like have these resources to use, to your benefit. But also like just having like, I don't want to say like manifesting it or like even like a false sense of or like delusional mindset that you're going to be successful, but like, dude, just like believe in yourself. Like, I'm going to make this happen. And if I believe I'm making it happen, like I'm going to find, the resources I need and the tools I need to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely true. And like, if you can convince yourself you're going to make it happen, that's going to be the hardest part. I think people that are like half in, half out, like they're not willing to commit to it, that's where you're going to have a hard time convincing other people that you're the person they should be training with, because you're not even convincing yourself that this is what you want to do full time, or that you have the ability to make a living off of this. So like really just diving in and betting on yourself, I think that's a huge lesson to learn there. Uh, so then moving to more gen pop training, like I think there's almost this mindset in the space that like working with elite athletes is like the top of the top in terms of being a trainer, being a strength and conditioning coach, or even like being a manual therapist, or whatever it is, like rehab specialist. It's like people think about working with athletes as like, oh, like that's what I want to do, I want to go into that. And I think something like this goes well with talking about building a business. Something I realized early on is there's athletes, there's like elite level athletes that probably go through a more like well-defined strength and conditioning and training system and rehab system, that it's like, all right, if you're working with them, like you're not working with them, you're probably working for a team. And there's like, yeah, there's the private side of things, which we'll get into in a bit here. But I think a lot of people, when they start working with athletes, it's not these athletes, especially earlier on in your career. It's like these athletes that are like, if you're not watching, go on YouTube and watch. But I'm saying there's like the top 1%, and then there's the other 99%. And even if you're at like the 98, 97%, like there's a stark drop off in the amount of money that athletes make once you get outside of that top 1%. So the thing that I realized early on is like the people that are the most fucked up and need the most help, one at the worst, don't have the money to pay for it. So that's like this kind of the more kind of like outskirts, like fringe tier athlete that's like maybe a little bit older, they're a little bit broken, but they're still trying to make it, or they just didn't have all the gifts genetically and they're trying to piece it together and trying to maximize their training to make it to that next level. Like those are the athletes that I got to work with earlier on in my career. And I still work with those athletes. Like I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just saying that like they're not getting paid like that top 1%. So if you're working with them and you want the glory and you want the money in terms of a trainer, you're not going to build your business off of those people. That's like, those are people that you help because you want to help them and that you want to get that experience in that realm. So maybe one day you can get a shot of working with that top 1%, the elite athletes, or compile that experience to work for a team or a university. But when you're just getting into business, you got to work Gen Pop. Like Gen Pop that's where the money is at. And like, I've worked with athletes that have been to the Olympics. I've worked with professional athletes, people that get paid way more than I'll ever get paid. But the majority of my income, my entire career, has always been from Gen Pop, period.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. And I think we could talk about like from a coaching standpoint, how that makes you a better coach. But even like the way that I looked at it, getting into it, was like, okay, I want to circle back to athletes. Like you said, a lot of these like kind of like 98th percentile athletes are broke or broken or whatever. So it's like I want my gym pop business to get me to a point where like if I get an opportunity to work with these people and like they don't want to pay me, like I can still offer them some sort of pro bono service and I can start to get that experience.
Yeah.
Right. That was like honestly, like actually I remember vividly like reaching out to Shallow. I was like, hey, I want to work with more pro athletes. Like, what should I do? This is probably like 3-4 years ago. He's like, dude, do it for free. Like just
Yeah.
find them, get their trust, do it for free, and then like eventually they'll pay you. So it's like, okay, my goal is to, while I'm only working with Gen Pop clients, like get to the point where I can afford to give away some of my time like that.
Yeah. I think that's a really good goal, because that's exactly how it is when you first start. It's like, you might not be able to afford to do that for people because you need to establish a business, you need to pay your bills. Like, even getting to that point where you can work for free, that's, that's selfish in some, right? That's like, that's a luxury to have, is that, all right, I'm at the point where now I can give my off, or I can offer my services for free. And like, being able to network, being able to create the time that you can do that, and then being able to execute on those services, like, that shows a level of drive and a level of passion that, all right, you're not going to make it to the next level in terms of training higher and higher level athletes if you don't possess those qualities. So like, there's no better advice than that. It's like, be selfish enough to create that time that you can then give back to the things that kind of light that spark in you, or the passion and why you're doing what you're doing. And that's like, every single time I work with a pro athlete, it's the same thing. It's like, I'm getting so much from this experience. I even feel bad charging them. It's like, I'm getting more out of this than you are, guaranteed. And like, I know the money's like a formality at a certain point, because a lot of them have a lot of it. And
Right.
like, I'd pay much more. Like, it's funny. That's kind of what the level 3 is, right? Is pay money to come in to work with athletes to get that experience, right? It's there's so much that you can pull just from even the interaction, and like, being in an environment where you can see how they move or the way they think of things in the gym. Is You can pull so much out of that as a trainer that you can then take, and you can put, shades of that into every other client that you have. And the communication, the mindset around it, the why, the buy-in, like the motivating factors, all that stuff. It's, to me, that's the stuff that working with a high performer, and it doesn't matter what realm it's in. Like, I've worked with people that are very successful in business, and just like getting to interact with them and talk about, like, the things that motivate them, or getting to see like someone who's accomplished something meaningful. Like, I've worked with a client that sold his company to Steve Jobs. That is an insane feat, right? So just seeing how, like, just asking questions and understanding, like, hey, like, how did you get in that position? Like, what made you want to build that company, or like, what connected you with this guy, or like, interacting with him, what was that like, and then working with him afterwards. Like, there's so much to be learned from people like that in terms of just perspective, because someone who's a Division 1 football player, Nick Ridpath, uh, and is getting a shot to go into the league, like, they're different. And anyone who says they're not, like, you're just lying to yourself. Like, they're outliers in terms of performance, in terms of the way that they see the field, they see the gym, the way that they move. It's like, getting to understand like the perspective that comes with that. I think that's invaluable.
Yeah, I like the parallels you kind of drew there too, and I think circling back to training Gen Pop, it's like inevitably if you're in like an urban market, you're going to start training people like you just described, people that have built massive companies, or they have like they're VP of a business, or they're working like relatively successful jobs. You start to get some perspective from them on what it takes just to be a successful individual, a business owner, right? And those are the same kind of parallels you'll see towards like high performing athletes that want to play in the league. And two, just like working with people that are successful, you don't get that same intimidation when it gets translated to an athlete.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like I've trained these handful of people that are all like multimillionaires or very successful. It's like, okay, like arguably this kid is not even in the NFL yet, right? So like there's not that intimidation anymore about working with those people. And once you get the reps in, even if it is, like those 98th percentile athletes we just talked about, someone who's not quite at the top, it's like we're just building our skill set. They're getting exposure to it. So now if we do get somebody who shows up on our door who is, in the 99th percentile, it's like, cool, we're confident. We've
Yeah.
done this before. We've worked with these individuals from a personality standpoint. We've worked with these people from a physical standpoint, athleticism. Like we know what to do. We know how to handle it. Like now it's our job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure you've gotten this question, and like, we haven't really even gotten here in terms of your story of your career, because we've hinted towards it. You went Gen Pop, you kind of build your business there, and now you're kind of taking a swing back in terms of working with athletes, right? Like, I know you've been working with Joey for a long time. You got a couple fighters you're working with. You're now doing a camp for a couple guys looking at a pro day. It's like, what has that transition been like to come back to it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just kind of coming full circle, but with a more sharpened skill set,
Mm,
right? Because training with Gen Pop, you get really good at just teaching the basic stuff, which I think maybe earlier in my career, I may have tried to overcomplicate things a bit more, just not having that perspective. But now it's
mhm.
like you've really learned how to hammer the basics. So like you're really good like smashing that hammer, and now you know when to get the scalpel out.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's probably the biggest thing you'll learn from working with Gen Pop is how to communicate well, efficiently, and effectively, right? Because these people, they probably don't have any sort of athletic or kinesiology, anatomy, physiology background. So when you're talking to them, they need to be simple, concise, executable cues that you're using. So really, it's just refining your language over time because, like you said, it's easy to, the more you learn, you kind of go through this swing where you start to overcomplicate things and you think of every single variable and you think that every piece of information that you learned applies in every single scenario, which is just simply not true. And it is like, what is it, like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where it's like the less you know, the more confident you are, and then the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know shit about shit, and then you kind of humble yourself, and then over time you build this kind of cool confidence where you not only understand the knowledge behind things, but you understand, more importantly, when it applies and when it doesn't apply. And I think that's probably what you're talking about when you say like it came full circle. It kind of swung back the other way, because that's the change I've seen in myself, is that like there's almost this uh like self-aggrandizing like attitude that comes with knowing the information, where you're not necessarily over informing someone for them. You're doing it for yourself at a certain point. It's like you're trying to validate yourself and what you know in that kind of like earlier on stage. It's like, I have all this information. I'm a better trainer than everyone. You should listen to me and not them. When like over time, it's more so, the way I look at things is I approach it more so with curiosity. Is like, all right, why is this person moving this way? Why did this cue work for them? Like what's going through their mind when they're going through this movement? And now, instead of like telling people what to do, more so what I do is I ask questions like, how did that feel? Where did you feel that? Like are you, is it painful? Are your symptoms improving? Like XYZ. Like it's more so I start the conversation with a question rather than a statement, because I already know what I want to see change, but I want to know why they're not able to execute on it, or what they're thinking about that's causing them to make it look the way that it's looking. So kind of coming back to the original point is that like when you're working with Gen Pop, you have a ton of different personalities coming in. And I've had like the people with a bunch of money that the only thing that's causing them to come in the gym is the fact they're spending money on it. And then I've had people that can like barely afford the service that are just dying to get better. And then like literally everyone in between, like the mom of 3 kids that wants to get in shape to go on a hike with their family, or like the busy lawyer that's stressed out and just wants an hour out of his day, he doesn't have to think about work. So it's like I've seen every different type of personality and like every different type of motivating factor that comes in the gym. And if you can take, every single one of those and you can communicate effectively, not just in terms of exercise, like getting them to do what they need to do to exercise well and improve in the gym, but also like in terms of getting their, like managing their personality, like getting buy-in from them, getting them to come back session over session, getting them to understand the process of, you know, I worked. I still work in a CrossFit gym. I just have my own section of it now. But um, I coached CrossFit for a while when I was like in school, and that was such an accelerated learning curve for me, because now you're literally just getting people that know nothing about exercise. You're asking them to do the most complex movements that they can in the gym, and you're getting people that also have the mindset of, I don't need to know anything. Like, you're going to tell me everything to do. So it's like literally from the ground up, you see like people fail things in every single variation of failure, and you have to communicate it in every single variation of communication, because you're not just working one-on-one, you're working with like 20 people at a time. And it's like you almost have to triage the situation of like, all right, I need to figure this shit out real quick, or like John over there is going to kill himself, he's going to decapitate himself with the barbell today. So so it's like Gen Pop, I think, is like, I don't know, there's almost this like, it's not cool to work with Gen Pop. And I don't think this, but it's like it's easy to think that, because it seems kind of mundane. It seems kind of, it's not as flashy as working with athletes, or like throwing med balls or doing power cleans. But I think the one person who I'll give credit to in my eyes that like made it cool was Eric Bagheera. Is that he's just like, yo, I train Gen Pop and I'm fucking good at it. And he's like, kind of like built his business and his niche around that. And I think that's fucking sick. That's like more people need to own that. It's like, no, I'm really good at helping like everyone. And I think that's a really valuable trainer, someone that's very confident in that, because I think that's the hardest niche to get into, is someone that has to fix everything. Literally, like you'll have people coming to you that maybe like I've even when I had graduated, but I was still training. Like I had people come to me, they're like, I just can't afford rehab, or like my insurance kicked me out of rehab. Like I don't know what to do now. And I'm like, yeah, we'll figure it out. Like come to me. And like you get those clients that like the medical system has kind of failed in that traditional sense, that like rehab should get you back, to at least pre-injury status, if not better. But like they got kicked out, or they can't afford to do it, or they don't have insurance, or whatever it is. So like now you're their medical provider. And I think that's a really cool way to develop a skill set that will kind of push you or excel you in any niche that you want to get into. But you can't skip that. You can't skip that and just go right to the top and like work with professional athletes.
Yeah, dude. God, that was beautiful. I don't know what to add to that. I think like you hit so many good things there, just from like uh training Gen Pop. You get so many different personalities, so you learn how to handle those personalities. Like type A, type B, or like people that are going to be very inquisitive, people that don't care at all, like they just
Yeah.
want to show up and be told what to do. But like I think even when you start working with high performers, like some of them are going to be the exact same way. Like some of the kids we train down in Tampa, like want to know why we're doing everything.
Yeah.
How is it going to be better, right? Others are going to be like, hey, like shut the fuck up. I don't care. Like don't talk to me. Like just tell me what to do, right? Like so you're going to see a different spectrum. So it's understanding how to handle these different personalities. It's like, well, if I've trained dozens or hundreds of Gen Pop clients, then like, okay, like I probably know that they're going to be similar to this person that I already trained before. And
Yeah.
you can almost apply that to just like basic exercise execution, like people that suck at getting into their hips. It's like, okay, I've trained these several dozen clients had the exact same issue. Just because they're a better athlete doesn't make them any different if they have the same issue. So I'm probably still going to address the issue in the same way. And
Yeah.
honestly, like I've had easier times like teaching a 60-year-old like grandma how to do an RDL than I have with professional athletes before.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And it's just because like someone is generally athletic, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're like detail oriented enough, or they have that motor learning skill that someone else might have. And that's something that like throws me for a trip. I mean, not anymore. It doesn't, because I expect it, but like you see people that are incredible athletes at the thing that they do, and like they literally can't stand on one leg, or they don't understand how to engage their core to do a plank. And like these very like base level things, it's like, yo, homie, how have you made it this far in your athletic career without just exploding because you don't understand how to use your core at all in a controlled setting? Maybe you can use it to like lay out for a football or like brace for a hit, but like you don't understand, like you don't have that conscious awareness of like use this muscle. And they'll like, I don't know, they'll like punch you in the throat on accident because they don't know the difference between punching you in the throat and activating their core. So it's pretty crazy when you see it in that sort of capacity.
Yeah, I think there's so much value there too. Like we'll see it all the time. Like athletes are like, oh, my back hurts, my knee hurts, my hip hurts, whatever. Sometimes you're like, shit, like I don't know what it is. Most of the time, you watch them move, and you're like, okay, like, hey, buddy, like you're gonna be good. Here's why. Like I can see exactly what the issue is. Like if we address this, that's probably gonna get better.
Yeah, dude, that's one of the things that throws me for a loop, like to this day with every single person I work with. But it's like people, and the more you know, the worse this gets. I feel like people have no idea how to describe what they're feeling, right? So it's like you ask someone what's going on, and like you have kind of a list or an inventory in your head of like, okay, if it's X, Y, and Z, it's probably this. If it's A, B, C, it's probably this. And like you can categorize these things pretty well. And then they just use descriptors that like you've never heard before. Like it's a twinge on my left shoulder when I flex my right big toe, and like sometimes when I get out of the car holding my backpack, it hurts, but other times if I'm holding a cup of coffee, it doesn't. I'm like, yo, what the fuck are you saying right now? And like just their interpretation of what's going on in their body is just like so random that you like literally like you're stumped just listening to them describe it. And you're like, all right, I don't know what the fuck I would do for this person. Let's just get them to move. And then the second you see them do like a lunge or like a press or, you know, lift their hands over their head, you're like, oh, I know exactly your issue. And maybe it's not like an issue that correlates with the things that they said, but it's an issue with the way that they're moving. And something I've learned over the years is like, all right, if I see an issue with the way that they're moving, that radiates, you know, if it starts midline, it's going to radiate everywhere distal from that. So if you can start to just clean up things that you see are going wrong, then you're probably doing the thing that they need. And it's the way that I'll describe it to people, even if like I'm very transparent with them, like, yo, I have no idea what's going on with you, but I'm seeing X, Y, and Z in the way that you're moving. And if we clean these things up, then best case scenario, you're going to move better, and there's going to be less complicating factors with that injury. So you'll probably feel better from that alone. And that alone will take stress off of the injured area, the area where you're having symptoms. And because of that, it's going to feel better. And then we can have kind of more focused work around the issues that you're having. And that's like a big, long way of me describing like, yo, homie, I have no idea what's going on with you, but I know that there's stuff going on with you, and we're going to fix that stuff, and it'll probably make you feel better.
We were even having a similar conversation a couple weeks ago, talking about like knee pain. Somebody was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, like what about like meniscus versus ACL versus MCL versus like tendonitis, this, that, and the other?" And you're like, honestly, like I don't really care about the pathology. Like I'm just gonna figure out what hurts and what feels good. And I'm gonna look for other issues. Like if they move like shit through their hips, I'm probably just gonna help them move better through their hips, and then like
Yes.
scale in some exercise at the knee joint that feels good for them. Like that's where I'm gonna start. Like I don't know what the exact pathology is, but like I'm gonna figure out a way to kind of address the issues that I see and get them moving. It feels good, and then like we can figure that out later.
Yeah. I love it. And that's kind of what I was hinting towards before. And I'm like, that's the cool confidence that comes out of experience, right? You earlier on in your career probably would have tried to overanalyze this and throw like the newest, most effective exercise that you found of like a banded heels elevated, you know, TKE with an anterior load ipsilaterally to the left, but not the, I don't fucking know, but like overcomplicate things with hyper specificity when really that's not needed. Like it's like let's just start with the most simple thing here, because in my mind there's two things that if you can't do these well, you need to start here, and that's understanding how your breathing and your bracing relate to positioning. If you can't do it, understand that like breathing and muscular bracing, then that's where you need to start, because everything else is worse off if you don't understand that. That's like trying to build a house on a crumbled foundation. It's eventually going to fall over. So if you don't know anything that's going on with your clients, but they don't use their core well and they don't understand how breathing relates to movement, start there. Start there and then work out from there. Start to associate that to shoulder mechanics, start to associate that to lower body mechanics. And that will probably solve the problem before you even know what the problem is. And then you just act confident later on. It's like, oh, yeah, I totally knew that that was going to help because you can't do anything well if you don't do those things well.
Yeah, I love this like the Occam's razor approach. Like the simplest solution is probably the right one. So like
Yeah.
start to look for like a problem that is solved with a simple solution, and it's okay. Like you move like shit through your hips, or like you have a terrible time like controlling your center mass, or X, Y, or Z solution. It's like or issue, and it's like cool. Okay, I can fix that. I don't know if that's going to give me a direct response that I want in regards to fixing your issue, but like it's probably a pretty good start.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I'm sure you've gotten this question a lot. I know that I have, and I feel like we've laid a pretty good context to answer this now. When people ask you, like, how do you train athletes? Like, what do you do different? What's your answer to that question?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Honestly, I take a really general approach. So like, and I get this a lot from Killian as well, which is like outside of what their sport is, as an athlete, as a human, okay, how do they move? How do they move? What are they good at? What are they bad at? What qualities are they good or bad at? Right? Like, are they generally strong, generally weak? Are they generally twitchy? Like, and then like what vectors are they better like more with more like horizontal force production versus vertical? Like some really like basic stuff, and I just start there and try to address those things
Mhm.
outside of looking at exactly what their sport is and looking at like shape of sport and demand of sport. Like just look at that as an athlete. What are some like, big rocks to turn over that are probably going to carry over to their sport regardless of whatever the sport is? And then we can get into getting like a bit more specific with what the sport is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it all starts with like just understanding who that person is and how they're moving, what they're doing, what their tendencies are, and then just literally working with that, which is, again, it comes back to if you have that experience with Gen Pop, you've probably seen it before. Maybe it manifests a little bit differently, or it's to a lesser degree or a greater degree, but you've probably seen a similar thing if you've worked with people for any meaningful amount of time. I'm not even talking like decades. Like you're, I don't know if I've voiced this earlier on, but I should have. It's impressive to me that you've been doing this for 5 years because you're so far along in your career and like the development and the way that you run your business and the quality of training that you do, the quality of your work product. Like that's why I'm so impressed by you specifically. And I that doesn't have to be something that takes decades to do because it's about the intention day to day of what you're doing. You can develop this relatively quickly, but I think it does take a certain amount of time, like for you just to get exposure to all of the different things that you're going to see. Because within the human body, there's only so many things that you're going to see, right? There's only so many different ways someone can have a fucked up shoulder or a fucked up knee or a low back, and you start to see these things. Like once you start to see them on repeat and once you've solved that problem, you now, as long as there's some intention and some thought process and some assessment around, like self-assessment around what you're doing, is once you solve that problem once, now you have a solution. And every single time, like you have an answer of how to get from point A to point B, and now you're just refining that time over time. It's like, all right, I did this before. What was the fluff? How can I trim the fat here? How can I make this more efficient? And the more times you see that, then it's like, oh yeah, like do these two things and you'll be fine. And it can be that simple. And I think a lot of times, like, again, people overcomplicate things. People don't pay enough attention to what they're doing. So like if you have a couple years, like 1 to 2 years of Gen Pop experience, you'll probably see everything you need to see. If you have like a decent client load, if you're in a box gym or like a setting where you have a pretty full schedule, like you're you're not going to need to see any more than that. And then from there, it just becomes a refinement process of how can I make this more efficient the next time I do it, or like what do I do with this person after I get them healthy. Like the most challenging cases for me now are people that just want to perpetually train with no real goal. It's like, okay, I can get you better at whatever you want to get better at, but if we can't define that, then like I get bored with this. It's like, okay, I guess we'll progress RDLs for the next 6 weeks. And like that's the most frustrating stuff to me. When people have like an actual problem, it's like, oh yeah, let's see how quickly we can fix this, or what can we do to address this in less time. This time we go through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just like getting the reps in and then creating like a heuristic for different things that you see.
Yeah.
And like if you get enough reps of the same stuff, you're gonna figure out, okay, like if I see this, then it probably means this, and then there's probably like some subcategories under that where like there will be some differences, some variance in how you approach those different things. But like you see enough things enough times, and you're gonna know exactly what to do the next time that you see it, and that's not gonna be different between Gen Pop or an athlete or somebody in a rehab setting. Even like obviously there's context to be had there, but like you're gonna get a good bulk of your decision making that's already there because you've seen it so many times. It's okay, I know
Yeah.
exactly what to do. Now you're gonna get buy-in too because you're confident. You can explain what you're seeing to them while you're doing it and how like the solution that you're giving them is gonna help them feel better, and then they're
Yeah.
bought in. It's like cool. And sometimes you can be wrong, and they just get the placebo effect because like you're so confident and they believe they can understand what you're explaining and how that's going to help them feel better. And they're like, okay, I believe in that. Maybe I
Yeah.
will feel better.
Yeah. Absolutely. So now having that experience with Gen Pop, working with high level athletes, what does your assessment process look like for those populations? Or does it differ from one to the other? Or are there like certain things that, day one, someone comes in, you don't really have much information about them? Like, what are the minimum requirements? Like, what do you want to see them do before you make a judgment of, okay, this is the direction that we're going to go with this person?
Yeah, just like generally speaking, I would say with athletes, we'll add in some more like dynamic components like jumping, like ballistic movements, like throwing med ball, stuff like that. But like general population and athletes, like I just want to see you do basic movement. I don't want to have you like lay on the ground and do a bunch of like passive tests. I'm not going to put you on a table. Like I just want to see you squat. I want to see you hinge. I want to see you stand on one leg to some degree, maybe a single leg RDL or like a lunge variation. I want to see you organize yourself overhead. So like how do you look when you get into shoulder flexion under load? I want to see how you look when you get into shoulder extension. And then like you can kind of fill in a lot of the gaps there if you kind of check all those boxes.
Yeah, I love it. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Like I got to this point where I was doing so little in my assessments that I'm like, am I getting lazy, or am I like, is this a disservice to them? And I just realized like, no, there's not really that many things that I need to know before I make a judgment of what you need to get better at. Like
Yeah, I had
it,
the exact same conclusion, the exact same thing. I was like, am I being lazy? Or like, and
yeah,
even like sometimes I'll get new clients that are like, wait, all you want to do is like see me train. And I'm
yeah,
like, yeah, like honestly, I've seen like enough issues with these things that like usually I can spot it on your more compound movements. Like I can watch you move how we're gonna move when we work together, and then troubleshoot any issues I see from that, as opposed to like a lot of people, even like myself, if you put me in like a 90-90, I look terrible.
yeah.
Like, even if I can hinge and squat pretty well and, like, I do really well on one leg, put me 90-90, like, it's fucking awful. It's dog shit.
Yeah. Yeah. People are always going to have their things that like either they're mentally preoccupied with or it's an ongoing issue. But like it is kind of just what you said is like you just need to see them train. And at a certain point, your assessment becomes writing a good program, like writing a meaningful program. If you understand like hip mechanics, shoulder mechanics, how they need to use the core to integrate those two things, like you can have a pretty concise program where you just start them at a reasonable point. Like maybe you literally just see them move, like do a few movements, like have them do a plank, have them do a walking lunge, maybe like an overhead press or something of that sort. And then based off of the information you have there, you know exactly where they're at in terms of progression or regression through each body region. And you can match that pretty accurately to the demands that they'll be able to execute on and the ones that they're going to need to train or they're going to need to increase their ability to execute on. And then if you can kind of meet them where they're at in terms of the program that you're putting in front of them, then you just need to watch them and see, all right, this is what they're struggling with. This is the breakdown point. And you can tailor that program to not really look very different, whether it's Gen Pop, whether it's a professional athlete, whether it's someone that's been training for 5, 10 years. But the program doesn't need to look that different. And I laugh to myself sometimes because like I'll like my clients will know that I'm gone for like a month working with these football players, and they'll come back and like ask me like, "Oh, what are the workouts that you do with these guys? Like, what does that look like?" And I'll be like, "To be honest, it's not much different than what we do. Like, it's a lot of the same stuff. There's maybe just like more power components or like more plyometrics or bounding involved in what they do, but like you don't really need to do that stuff." So, like, it's pretty much the same program minus that.
Yeah, exactly. And even, like, regards to the assessments, I don't know, I see a bunch of, like, working in a gym still, like, I see a bunch of, like, just, like, weird assessments going on all the
Mhm.
time that I know just give absolutely no information. I'm like, "You'd be better off just watching somebody move through the movements we're gonna be doing anyways, and, like,
Yeah.
getting better at coaching those and understanding, like, what might be breaking down,
Right.
in those movements that's causing, the issues that we're seeing. And then again, like, there's some nuance to that with, like, injuries and stuff, or if we see something weird, sure, we can, like, test it with something more specific, but I think, like, generally speaking, the majority of coaches would be, like, much better off taking that approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. There's kind of a point where I judge myself for this a little bit, but like if someone really is like in their head about a certain injury or something, or like people kind of they'll suffer from a diagnosis a lot of times. Like, I herniated this disc and now I can't do X, Y, and Z, even though like they're fine from the herniation, or like they have like some sort of complex around a specific movement, like, oh no, I don't deadlift, or I don't squat, I don't do this and this. Then I'll give them some fluff assessment around those things. Like, okay, well, let's see what your hinge mechanics look like, or let's see how your low back moves as you do X, Y, and Z, just to like make them feel heard in that, make them feel like, I'm giving them special attention for this body region, but the program doesn't change. And they're still going to do exactly what I know they should be doing, even if you're disguising a deadlift for someone that doesn't want a deadlift as like a B stance RDL or something of the sort. Something that like it's far enough for them that they can't make the logical leap that this is the same movement pattern. But you watching it's like, yeah, we're still training the same mechanics. We're still going to build that resiliency in the same way. And you get them to a point where like they're really good at that thing. Like, hey, I know like deadlifts were a pretty big hurdle for you when we first started, but let's just try it today and let's see how it feels. And then they can do it without discomfort or pain or something like that, and then boom, they're your client for life then, because like you got them over that like thing that was a very big mental hurdle for them, but you did it in a way where you just understood like their apprehension around it and why they had that because of maybe deficits in movement qualities, and then you fill those gaps and now they don't have an issue doing that thing that they thought was going to plague them forever.
Yeah, no, dude, beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. So I mean, I'd say like the main takeaway here, and it's cool to hear it from your perspective, is that like Gen Pop that's your bread and butter. That's going to be the most challenging thing that you do, is like if you can do Gen Pop and you can work really well with general population, then it's really easy when you get into these niches, because yes, there's always going to be the sport specific or the skill component of that, but a lot of times that's not fully your responsibility in the gym, right? You can outsource that. Just like for me, like if someone tears their ACL, like as a chiropractor, I'm like, oh, you need to go see an ortho. I'm like, I don't fucking deal with torn ACLs, but like I can rehab you from it. So it's like there becomes this point where everything you need to know, and the person in front of you is not going to be any different, and you already know how to make the changes that they need to make, and then you just tailor that to whatever their end goal is, whatever the function level of function is that they need, or whatever the task that they need to complete. You just kind of tailor it towards that. So it's like, don't overlook the value that you get from training Gen Pop.
Yeah, dude, I can't tell you the amount of times that like I'll be doing the things that we're just talking about with like professional athletes, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, I've never trained like this in my life." And it's like, God damn it, like that's really sad to hear because this is like all like super simple shit, but like
Yeah,
they never touch any of this stuff, you know?
yeah,
And
and
even
that's the
like
thing.
the on the injury side of things too, dude. Like, shout out to Brandon. Like, I mean, that's part of what I've been doing is now like where I get a lot of a lot of clients who are like coming back from injury or in like more of a rehab setting. I partnered with Brandon, so me and Brandon work together, and he's like the clinical side of things. If I have any questions about like something that might be out of my scope of practice, or I just need him to tell me like what I should avoid doing, etc., I just communicate with him. But like we just been working together on a case with somebody who's had back pain for like I want to say like 10 years, right, from a car accident, especially like the last 2 years. And they've been to PT, they've been to chiros, they've done like this, that, and the other. Then to an ortho, X-rays, like nothing's going on from like an orthopedic standpoint. And like,
Mhm.
what did we do? Like, got them moving again, like B stance RDL, goblet squat, a lunge, like a shoulder press, and like a single arm row. Like that's most of our training. It's like super simple, but it's
Yeah,
just like being able to coach people through this simple shit can have a really big effect on them.
yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and to be honest, a lot of that is there's such a poor standard in the training industry, in the rehab industry, in the therapy industry, in the strength and conditioning industry, that if you just know how to work with people and you know how to get results, you will be far above that standard.
Right. And then when you're communicating with them, it's like you hear what they've gone through and you start to probe, like, hey, what did you guys do? What did you do with this clinician? What did you do with this trainer? And it's like, oh, okay. like I'll be honest, like that's all like pretty much dog shit. So I think like if we tried doing, the things I just mentioned, like I think you could see pretty good progress.
Absolutely agree. Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Ridpath, a gem. I appreciate you taking the time, man. If people want to work with you, if people want to find you, where can they do that?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, dude. It was a
Always.
pleasure to get on here. And yeah, Instagram, I think it's at Nick Ridpath _ still. Yeah, just DM me on there. Website's linked in there as well. Always happy to chat.
Cool. Thanks for the time, man.